Game Freak giveth and Game Freak taketh. That has kinda been the story of the Pokemon series in certain aspects. It has happened quite a lot for a generation to introduce something new, only then for the next game to not have it or downplay it. Think of battle gimmicks for example, or even more specific things like Dex Nav. Fortunately, generally speaking, if something truly sticks, it continues to stick for generations on end and might very well become a new staple going forward, and that's exactly the kind of thing I want to look at today. What is the biggest change, the most important new thing every Pokemon game introduced to the series? And we begin with Yellow, seeing as Red and Blue were obviously the first games, so they introduced everything to the baseline. Yellow is far from a complete rework of Gen 1 though. Its changes are much more subtle, and while it does appear like Game Freak already had some big ideas at the time, they were only able to implement them on a very small scale. After all, the way your Pikachu is handled is reminiscent of features we'd see later, like walking Pokemon, interacting with them like Pokemon in Mirror Camp, and the early signs of friendship, as would be properly rolled out in Gen 2, are also already here for Pikachu only. So while you could pick any of these, I personally think their implementation is still a bit too barren to call them the biggest and most important changes, and instead I want to highlight something you might have completely forgotten Yellow even did. Take a look at his Ivysaur. Now take a look at this Ivysaur. Now try Machamp, or Ekans, or Mew. Pokemon Yellow was the first game where the Pokemon actually looked like they were designed to look by Ken Sugimori around the time of Red and Blue's release. This art was used for the anime, so it had more or less become the staple at this time, and looking at the majority of Red and Blue sprites, it was easily for the better. It seems like a small thing, and it does kind of feel like if Yellow hadn't done this, Gold and Silver probably would, but if no game had ever done this, who knows if I would be here talking about Pokemon today. I'm not sure a series with the creature design of the Red and Blue sprites would have survived that long. They're not easy on the eyes. But anyway, that's very hypothetical. The point is that giving all 151 Pokemon their canon looks in-game is what I would say Yellow's biggest step forward is. And then we come to the first actual new generation, Gold and Silver, and that immediately makes our job very difficult. The list of what this game introduced that is still prominent and basically unmissable today is staggering. It split up special and special attack and defense, it added a day and night cycle, it segmented your bag in a way that was much easier to use, it gave trainers unique names for the first time, it introduced the dark and steel type, held items, and it continued off of Yellow to build friendship into an actual mechanic every Pokemon had. All huge changes that I'm very glad it made, but let's be real here, there are only two candidates that can truly be considered the most important: breeding and shiny Pokemon. Two actually somewhat connected changes that both have had a huge impact on the trajectory of Pokemon going forward. Breeding is an absolute staple, I don't need to tell you that. And while I do feel like the prominence of it as a focus for players has gone down in recent years, with egg moves and hidden abilities being much more widely available, it was a huge part of the Pokemon community around the DS and 3DS days. And shiny Pokemon, I mean come on. I don't have to tell you how coveted these are. Entire communities have formed around shiny hunting, to the point it has honestly become a sort of separate entity in and of itself, kinda like how competitive battling is as well. Like, these people play the same games but in completely different ways, it's honestly incredible. So yeah, I cannot pick anything else but shiny Pokemon as the winner here. As big as breeding is, for many years and for many people, it was merely a means to getting shiny Pokemon. And now that the Masuda method isn't the top dog anymore, breeding has definitely lost a step of prominence, with shiny Pokemon still very much alive and kicking. On to the next third version, Crystal, which changed even less than Yellow did, most of its additions being way too small to feature here. As a kid, my number one favorite change this game did was introduce animations for the Pokemon when battling. This wasn't in Gold and Silver and wouldn't be in Ruby and Sapphire either, so it always made Crystal feel very alive and unique because of that. Whether it's entirely fair to pick this as the winner is a different question though. I think it's not important enough in the grand scheme of things, and it has quite a shaky legacy over the series. And if one change Crystal made perhaps wasn't all that game changing, but definitely very important, it was the inclusion of a female protagonist. Chris was the first of the since then completely normal choice to play as a female trainer rather than a male one, and I don't think there is any argument to be made that this change wasn't the most impactful one Crystal made. Every game since then has had this, it was honestly overdue, and it has no competition really. This is without a doubt the winner here. Just like with Gold and Silver, Ruby and Sapphire introduced so many new staples that picking just one winner is very difficult. But hey, that's the challenge. Even if contests were a fun and great addition, and I never want to go back to the box interface from before Gen 3, I don't think we can look at anything else but the changes to the battling system made in these games. Whereas Gen 2 basically birthed the shiny hunting side of the fandom, competitive battling would be completely different, if not dead, if it wasn't for Gen 3. It introduced weather effects, berries, the modern Eevee and Eevee system, natures, abilities, and even the format itself, double battles. I can't even imagine what the competitive scene would look like without all these, even if Gen 1 and 2 did also have their own. These introductions added so much more options, control and uniqueness to Pokémon in a way that allowed this side of the franchise to thrive, and even if it wasn't until Gen 4 that competitive battling really took off properly to another level, many of the changes made in Gen 3 made it possible. And I would say that out of all of these, abilities are probably the biggest change, especially since they also greatly impact the other sides of the community. Shiny hunters have relied on Flame Body for years, for example. And it's not to mention that these days it seems like what ability a newly introduced Pokémon may have is decided very early on, because more and more Pokémon have abilities that truly make them unique and are completely baked into their design, arguably even more so than say signature moves are. So as big as those other changes were, this doesn't apply to natures or weather effects or even double battles, which are not that common in the actual games these days. Abilities are unavoidable and are a key element of a Pokémon's design nowadays. And next up, we don't have Emerald because FireRed and LeafGreen released earlier, and for a list like this, chronological order is very important. In a way, the fact these games exist can honestly be considered their most important change. Remakes, or what I guess we can now call revisits with the Legend series, are a huge part of the Pokémon series nowadays, and it feels like at least 30% at minimum of all Pokémon discussion at a certain time is about remakes and how remakes can change and look and whatever. I do think that's a little cheap to pick as the biggest change, personally. But on the other hand, FireRed and LeafGreen really didn't introduce that much. It was mostly focused on bringing Kanto to the new standard. It didn't do too much to push the game forward. You can now connect to other players wirelessly, but you still need a device, and I think considering these remakes the start of online connectivity to be a little much. So if you want, feel free to consider the idea of remakes the winner here, but I want to go with something different which is not remotely as big, but is at least actually in the game. An unlimited bag. Up until FireRed and LeafGreen, your bag had a maximum number of items it could hold, which is why you could deposit them in the PC. Starting with these games though, you have unlimited space in your bag to store whatever the hell you want. It's not abilities level big, and that's for sure, but it's something we easily take for granted, and I wouldn't like to think of a world where this was never introduced. Time for Emerald 10, which is another game that definitely didn't revolutionize the series. In fact, I think I cannot go for anything else but the Battle Frontier, even if I had actually promised myself I wouldn't. The thing is, I think the Battle Frontier is fantastic and I would love to see it return, but it barely ever has, it's only in 2 more games, so I think calling it the most important change is a bit much when it has barely returned. However, Emerald's list of actual changes is so small that I still think the Battle Frontier deserves the win. Even if Game Freak has seemingly ignored it, the fanbase definitely hasn't, so it's at least important to them in that aspect, even if it didn't impact the series like abilities or even an unlimited bag did. I never realized that Emerald truly introduced this little. It merely shook up Hoenn a bit and introduced some stuff from FireRed and LeafGreen, but that's about it. The same can definitely not be said for Diamond and Pearl, and I think we all know what the real candidates here are. Sure, gender differences are cool and all, but we have to talk about the 2 massive changes this game made, being online Wi-Fi capabilities and the physical special split. It cannot be anything else, it has to be one of these 2. I think it's a difficult matchup though, because these 2 are so different yet both so important. Had the games never introduced online capabilities, I don't know where it would be right now, but probably not in the same good place. Had it never introduced the physical special split, that would have sucked, but you can't miss what you never had. Yet at the same time, when you go back to playing games before these two features, you miss the physical special split way more than you do online capabilities. So yeah, I think purely because online battling and trading feels more inevitable and the implementation in Gen 4 wasn't even that great yet, I have to say the physical special split wins this one. It changed certain species of Pokemon completely, and even though it is a battle-related mechanic, just like abilities, it doesn't only affect competitive battling. It's easy and accessible enough to also alter your regular playthroughs in major ways. In Gen 4, the third version does precede the remakes, so next up is Platinum. This game made some essential changes to improve the Sinnoh experience and is a great revisit. But just like Emerald, in terms of cold, hard changes, there isn't too much. Unironically, one of the biggest changes this game made that has persisted until this day, new forms notwithstanding, is the start of the removal of the game corner. This would start in Platinum in only the European version, but become worldwide not too long after. But let's keep things positive, which I guess means we have no other choice really than pulling another Emerald and picking a much praised location that hasn't really impacted the series much beyond this, being the Distortion World. It's no physical special split level change, it's not even a battle frontier I would say, but this game did propel Giratina from a bit of an overlooked and hard to rally for a Pokemon into somewhat of a fan favorite who at least holds a special place in the Pokemon world as a semi-Poke Devil. And the Distortion World is a huge part of that characterization. Fortunately, we don't have to scrape the bottom of the barrel for HeartGold and SoulSilver, because while these games do have their own little additions, like the Pokeavalon and the ability to check whether your starter is shiny before you choose it, there can only be one winner here, a feature fans have begged for literal decades since the release of the game, only to get a bit of a lukewarm reception when it actually came back. Pokemon walking behind you. Technically, this was already in yellow as well as the Sinnoh games, but there were still heavy restrictions there, which the Johto remakes lifted completely. The first Pokemon in your party will now walk behind you everywhere you go, making it really feel as if you're on a journey together. For years, it felt like this was HeartGold and SoulSilver's claim to fame, especially since it just refused to come back for generations on end. Ever since the DLC for Sword and Shield, it has become a bit of a staple again, but it seems like it doesn't really excite people in the way it once did for some reason. Even if that's correct, I would still say this is easily the biggest and most impactful change made in these games, it's not even close. At this point in time, Pokemon mechanically is quite close to what it still is today. And so, even if we hit a new generation with Black and White, the changes aren't as massive as they were before. That's not to say there weren't big additions, they definitely were, like seasons, Pokemon musicals, the streamlining of the online service, triple and rotation battles and the Dream World, but all of these have barely returned, and if they did, they weren't super impactful. Hidden abilities are definitely higher on the list, as well as this being the first games that have Pokemon move permanently throughout a battle, which is something they have done ever since. However, I would say the truly biggest change was making TMs reusable. This changed the dynamic of TMs completely and made me go from honestly barely ever using them, out of fear I would waste them, to collecting and finding them being very much worth it and exciting. While recent games have kinda ditched this again, the way they've made obtaining the TMs very easy, I think it kinda balances it out and leads to a situation where this can still be considered present today, even if in a different form. For a new generation, this is easily the smallest winner of the entire series so far, but it's still a very welcome change that I've always really appreciated. But when the original Black and White already didn't introduce anything truly groundbreaking, how bad must the situation for Univas Revisit be? Well, compared to Platinum and Emerald, honestly not so bad. As awesome as the Pokemon World Tournament and Pokestar Studios are, we don't have to lower ourselves to merely picking any location this time around, because while an important feature Black and White 2 introduced is not really relevant anymore today, it was a godsend for the years it was relevant for. The simple question, do you want to use another repel after one has run out? It's small, it's not as cool as the Pokemon World Tournament, but it's such a helpful little change that actually stuck for several generations, unlike those new features and locations. Pokemon has a weird history with quality of life features, but it's definitely a very welcome one that the 3DS years really made me appreciate all the more, even if it currently doesn't really have a place anymore with the open world formula and the fact repels don't even really exist anymore. It lives on in ROM hacks regardless. While Gen 5 was not a generation filled with new changes, Gen 6 definitely was. We have a new type, we have a brand new graphical style, we can move in 8 directions now rather than 4, Pokemon Me is here, super training, the XP share affecting all Pokemon, character customization, Mega Evolution kicking off regional gimmicks. All of these have become absolute staples since, and it's very hard to decide which is the most important here. And that mostly comes from the fact they're all important and impactful for different parties. For competitive battlers, the introduction of regional gimmicks is without a doubt the biggest one here. Not just Mega Evolutions, but Z-moves, Dynamax, Terrestrialization, all have dominated their scenes and are essential parts of what excites people for a new gen. For a more casual base, character customization has been a huge change. You just need to look at the reception the lack of it in Scarlet Violet received to see that. And for Game Freak and Pokemon as a series, the change to 3D, especially in regards to the Pokemon, is by far the most impactful change. It has completely changed the way they have to work. It changes how we see certain Pokemon, some for the better, some for the worse, and it's probably the only change out of all of these that I cannot ever see being changed. So for that reason, I would consider the change to 3D the biggest one here, even if it's still controversial to an extent. It affects everyone, from collectors to battlers to casuals to Game Freak themselves. Like I said, it will continue to affect everyone until the end of the universe. There is no going back to sprites, that won't happen, and there is nowhere else to go beyond 3D, so the style introduced in X and Y will last forever. Onto Arceus, which is another very tricky one, seeing as it's quite a faithful remake, and mostly changes things about the story and Hoenn without really shaking the whole series up. Things like Dexnav and Soaring are super cool additions, but we haven't seen them since, and that's something I try to avoid picking. So instead, I will go for something that may be related to Soaring, but at least it did return. Mirage Spots. Or rather, the easy and convenient way to get you a whole bunch of legendaries. Mirage Spots themselves have never been seen again, but the idea behind it has become a staple. Ever since Arceus, former box legendaries and other more minor legendaries, for lack of a better word, have become readily available through chronologically Ultra Space Wilds, Dynamax Adventures and Snacksworth hunts, making this one of the few things Arceus introduced that have actually become staples. And it's quite a big one too, it's quite an impactful part of these extra versions or DLC, the hunts for the legendaries. You'll get quite some game time out of it if you decide to go for it, it's not a minor thing. Sun and Moon gave the conventions of the series one hell of a shakeup. No more gyms, a region that takes far more from its inspiration than previous regions did, a new, slightly more realistic art style for the world and humans that has stuck around, and even more quality of life changes for competitive battling like hyper training. Gone were also HMs, which had long been requested by people like me, and while it was a godsend when it arrived, the game since have kinda ditched the replacement introduced here, right Pokemon as well, save for the remakes. So while that change has definitely been impactful and permanent, the way Sun and Moon did it has not been as much. So my vote here goes to not just what I believe is the biggest change, but also my favorite: regional forms. I remember when this was first revealed and it just blew me away. Not just because the idea is super awesome, but also because it felt at the time like I had heard every idea Game Freak could possibly do already. The Pokemon community had been so big and present for decades at this point that every idea had been suggested already, it felt like. But regional forms? I don't think I had ever seen someone suggest this idea, and then it was suddenly here and everyone loved it. It has also remained present until this very day, although its future is looking a little weird. Paldea only has 2 regional forms, Wooper and Tauros, and seems to prefer convergent species, which are basically the same thing, just with a different name. Legends EA also hasn't had any revealed yet, and due to it being set in modern day Kalos, you can definitely question whether they will show up at all. So while the idea still lives on, I can't say with 100% certainty that regional forms will literally be present in Gen 10, but that doesn't change me thinking this is Sun and Moon's biggest addition. For Ultra Sun and Moon though, get ready to lean in, cause we're scraping the bottom of the barrel here. I genuinely think that out of all games in the series so far, Ultra Sun and Moon impacted the overall Pokemon franchise the least. Nothing was really introduced here that has made grand returns or has fans asking for its grand return, so we're gonna go with something that feels more like a technicality if I'm being honest, but Ultra Sun and Moon technically did it first, and we will continue to see this for a very long time, I'm willing to bet. Introducing new Pokemon mid-gen. Yeah, this had never happened before. New forms? Oh sure, plenty of them. But Poipole, Nagaradel, Stakataka, Blacephalon and Zeraora are the first Pokemon ever introduced at a different time than the rest of their decks. This has since become completely normal. Sword and Shield's DLC did it, Legends Arceus did it, and we will presumably continue to see this for years. It all started with Ultra Sun and Moon. At least it's something. Onto Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which I had originally written down as immediately taking Ultra Sun and Moon's title as least impactful game, but I actually don't think that's true. Overworld Shinies are a big and very significant change brought forth by this set of games. After missing out on Sword and Shield to the annoyance of shiny hunters, it has become a staple since Legends Arceus, and I cannot imagine we will see this revert, with Game Freak only going more and more for an open world Pokemon in the overworld style game. Let's Go may have been a simplified Pokemon game in many ways. Introducing overworld shinies is something its more complicated brethren have copied with great success. And it's a more positive winner than Dexit, which may have been Sword and Shield's controversy, but was introduced by this game. And speak of the devil, next up Sword and Shield, and here I'm a little divided. If you consider the Wild Area, Isle of Armor and Crown Tundra to be open world areas, then this is without a doubt the biggest change these games have made. It revolutionized the way Pokemon is played and will presumably be played for who knows how long. It's arguably one of the biggest changes any game in the series has ever made. It might not be everyone's favorite, but it's undoubtedly among the most impactful. But is this really Sword and Shield's title to claim? It experimented with it, and it was the first to show this is where Pokemon is headed. But I don't think it's entirely fair and correct yet to call Sword and Shield open world games. This change may have been super impactful, it has also been kinda staggered, in a way that I find it hard to say whether Sword and Shield, Legends Arceus or Scarlet and Violet was the game to actually introduce it. They all did it in different ways and to different lengths. I find it hard to say where the exact mechanic was brought in. So while we all know this is a massive change, I won't have it as the winner for any of them. As far as I'm concerned, Switch era Pokemon introduced it, no particular one game. Which means that Sword and Shield's winner is Raid Battles. Now, technically these hail from Go, but Go isn't a mainline game, so that doesn't matter. And we have already now seen with Scarlet and Violet that this is something Game Freak likes to keep around. So while it's still fresh of course, I suspect this might turn out to be the staple Sword and Shield introduced to the series. Now we have the new winner of the least impactful Pokemon game ever. Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. These games barely do what most remakes do and shake up their region, let alone introduce new mainstays for the entire franchise. Like genuinely, I don't think these games introduce anything that has become even remotely impactful since. I don't think we will see its art style again anytime soon, so while that's new, I wouldn't call it impactful, so maybe we just go with the fact that these are the first and currently only, but that might at least change, Pokemon games that were not developed by Game Freak. Ilka made them, and while I doubt this experiment was one Game Freak was happy with, the fact it happened is quite crazy when you think about it, and might suggest this will end up happening more in the future, especially if Game Freak is planning on bigger gaps between releases. We'll have to wait and see, but this is the only thing I can imagine PDSP doing first that ends up returning and is impactful. Legends Arceus though, that's the polar opposite. Not only did it start a new sub-series that is confirmed to be staying, it also changed series conventions even more than Sun and Moon ever did. Barely any focus on battling, a ton of staples actually cut, like held items and abilities. You can catch every Pokemon in one copy of the game, trade evolutions are removed, and then I haven't even mentioned the open world aspect. Like I said, I wouldn't count. But while that may be off the table, another thing Legends Arceus introduced that is similar to it, but not quite the same, is the ability to sneak up on Pokemon and engage with them without random encounters or crashing into them. That hadn't been possible yet, and while the ability to catch Pokemon without battles doesn't appear to be becoming a true mainstay, this way of dealing with wild Pokemon has become a returning feature. Scarlet and Violet has it, Legends EA has it, that's good enough for me to count it. And then we have Scarlet and Violet, which are currently the most recent games of course, so saying what here will be the most impactful is more predicting than it is analyzing, but I'm still gonna do it. Since open world related mechanics are off the table, even if it is clear this game is where the transition is truly, properly finished, we have to look for something new, and I would think that the change made here that will remain present for a very long time is the change that allows battles to become optional. No longer will trainers force you to fight them, it's all your decision now, and that is something I don't think will be dialed back anytime soon. Ironically enough, Legends EA does appear to have some sort of mechanic with forced battles during the night, but during the day it seemingly still follows this train of thought, so I fully expect it to be present in Gen 10, 11 and everything beyond that as well. And just for fun, based on what we now know, I suspect the most impactful change Legends EA is gonna make is its battling system. We've already seen it's quite the overhaul, and I can fully imagine this being a huge success that will probably not replace the turn-based style of the main series, but could definitely become a staple for the Legends series going forward. But hey, the game isn't even out yet, this is some proper speculation. But that's all of them then. What changes did you find the most impactful? And are there any you wish were reverted? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Pokemon content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.